So we have the CEO. Hold on. So we're hosting. So this event is organized in connection with the government of China, the Asian Development Bank, and the International Sustainable Forestry Coalition. So today's event is the Forest Cup, Forest Finance Cup. And it's basically organized under the rubric of the Forest Pavilion. And basically we had a successful launch of the Forest Pavilion. It's the inaugural Forest Pavilion. And it's a global partnership that's been spearheaded by the UN Forum on Forests to convene all the partners to really give, shed a brighter light to the critical importance of forests. So this event is organized under the rubric of the Forest Pavilion. And obviously, finance is a huge, huge, topic at COP29, but it's also a huge topic within the forestry sector. We know that finance is required in trillions of dollars to fill that great forest finance gap, similar to climate finance. So it's not a new topic, but we're taking the opportunity to convene all of you who are here at COP29 to rally around this important topic of forest finance. So basically, what is going to happen today at this event is that we've convened really just all the best experts that we could find here at COP. And all the people, stakeholders that are really interested in forests and protecting forests. And we've gathered you here, and we have an amazing lineup of speakers to really figure out, what is happening. Why is there such a huge forest gap? Some say there's about $450 billion a year of forest finance gap. So it's not a new subject, but we are taking the opportunity to have this discussion. And we aim to have this discussion, carry it through next year onto COP30 in Belém. So we actually have a puzzle, an actual puzzle here. And of course, in the center is always indigenous peoples, women and youth, forest communities, and nature. But then we also have the puzzle pieces. These puzzle pieces are not all the pieces, who knows? So we may come up with additional pieces. But really, these puzzle pieces are well known to facilitate conversation and discussion today. So we will have speakers that can speak about each of these puzzle pieces and really come up with some, observations, hopefully some new solutions. So today's session, event, will be recorded, and one of the outcome documents will be a documentary that we will make and obviously share with the speakers and get their permission before we publish. And then we're also, at the same time, we're also starting a study specifically on forest finance, which we hope all of you will contribute to. It could be a joint publication. And then hopefully throughout the year, next year, we can also reconvene, get together and do some events and different dialogues together, and then we can meet again in COP30 to re-examine the puzzle pieces. So we'll kick off right now with some opening remarks. So our first speaker is just the great Juliette Biao. She's the director of the UN Forum on Forest Secretariat, and really the the visionary in getting us all together here. Thank you.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the United Nations Forum on Forest, I'm honored to join you today at this event dedicated to solving the forest finance puzzle in the Paris Agreement era. This gathering is a critical space for forest communities and the private sector to engage in essential dialogue, and I extend my sincere gratitude to the organizers for inviting me to participate. Forests are indispensable in the fight against climate change, providing up to 30% of the solutions needed to address this crisis. They serve as carbon sinks, support vital ecosystems, and sustain livelihoods. Forests also play a key role in aligning climate action with biodiversity protection, contributing broadly to sustainable development. A positive advancement in mobilizing global action for forests is the increasing integration of forest-related commitment in countries' nationally determined contributions, NDCs. Similarly, we must also ensure that forests are more prominently reflected in national commitment, strategies, and action plan for biodiversity, sustainable development, and livelihood development, in all of which forest plays a significant role. The next vital step is to help countries secure adequate financing to implement these commitments and planned actions. Distinguished colleagues, one of the main obstacles in realizing forest goals within these national commitments, strategies, and action plans is the lack of sufficient financial resources, which undermines critical initiatives such as afforestation, reforestation, and forest protection. Financing has always been a central challenge for forest-based solutions, and while the demand for funding has grown, the financing landscape has become fragmented due to the varied global processes and values associated with forests. To meet this demand, we need to mobilize financing from diverse sources: public, private, domestic, and international, through both existing and innovative mechanisms for climate change, biodiversity, livelihood support. Thank you, because I'm said that time is up. Thank you very much.
We'd like to call up to the stage Dr. Wang Chengfeng. He's the Executive Director General of the International Cooperation Department of China. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable Director of UNFF Secretariat, Dr. Juliet Biao, colleagues and friends, first of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Dr. Juliet Biao and all the participants for joining this event. Many thanks to colleagues from Asia Development Bank, International Sustainable Forest Coalition. Your creative ideas and active supports make this event be held today at this Forest Pavilion. Financial support is a vital enabler for enhancing the role being played by forests in addressing climate change, which are reflected in the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement emphasized that the developed country parties should continue to take the lead in mobilizing climate finance from a wide variety of sources, instruments, and channels, noting the significant role of public funds through a variety of actions, including supporting country-driven strategies and taking into account the needs and the priorities of developing country parties. These prescriptions in the Paris Agreement are generally in line with the calls made by the UN Forest Instruments and its strategic plan for mobilizing and providing significantly increased new and additional financial resources from private, public, domestic, and international sources. In the context of insufficient financial supports for incentivizing the actions for addressing climate change through sustainable management of forests, the insufficient finance allocated for supporting sustainable management of forests for addressing climate change is even more insufficient. Bridging this gap requires urgent mobilization of public and private surveillance to achieving the goals of addressing climate change and sustainable management of forests. This afternoon, National Forest and Grassland Administration of China, Asian Development Bank, and the International Sustainable Forest Coalition, with all participants during this event, will discuss how to make climate finance work for climate action in forests, especially through sustainable management of forests. To realize this purpose, many substantive puzzles of forest finance need to be solved. This event provides an opportunity for us to solve the puzzle through sharing experience and best practice, promoting innovative financial instruments, encouraging public-private partnership, and supporting sustainable investment flows. I hope this collective discussion this afternoon will be able to identify the concrete steps for closing the great forest finance gap so as to safeguard the future of forest people and the planet. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wang Chengfang. Next, I'd like to bring to the stage ADB's very own General Counsel Thomas Clark.
I was thinking of wearing these headphones because you know the saying that sometimes you can't hear yourself think, and I found these to be very helpful, but I guess I can hear myself think anyway, but maybe you need them. Dr. Juliet Bao, distinguished speakers, and really fellow stewards of the earth, because that's what we are here, stewards of the earth in this together. A very warm welcome to this inaugural Forest Pavilion. Thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Thomas Clark. I'm General Counsel of the Asian Development Bank, and we're absolutely privileged and honored to be able to work with so many terrific stakeholders in this. You know, those of you who may have been here yesterday for the launch of this know that we addressed the fact that we are in the midst of a triple planetary crisis. We need to address the critical issues around, you know, greenhouse gas emission and climate change, around pollution and biodiversity loss. Across all of these, forests are absolutely critical. And we talked about how protection of forests is actually a very intricate and very multifaceted problem, and that's why it requires multi-stakeholder solutions. So again, grateful to all of you representing all of your interests and constituencies for being here with us today at the Forest Pavilion. Now, we all know that nature, and especially forests, is essential to solving the climate crisis and to ensuring that we have inclusive and sustainable development. There is no conflict, no tension between development and protection of forests. Unless you have that protection and the climate protection that goes with it, you cannot have growth. We know that because, as discussed yesterday, 2/3 of GDP in Asia are affected negatively by the climate crisis. So we are aligned. If we want development, we have to save the climate, and that means saving our forests. So addressing the great forest finance climate gap deserves many diverse and innovative approaches, and that's what we're here to really focus on today. But it also involves new ways of thinking about nature. And I really want to stop and just ask fundamentally, before we get into answers, what are the questions? What does nature mean to us all? What is the right to nature? Who has it? And who should pay for the right to enjoy or benefit from nature? Who pays for the protection and sustainable management of nature? You know, our 21st century complex existence has challenged the traditional notion of nature as a public good to be enjoyed by all, and whether they pay for it or contribute to its maintenance. However, the traditional approach to nature has led to market failures, resulting in overexploitation, in poverty, and in drastic social inequalities. Generally, nature has been protected and managed by government and, of course, indigenous peoples for many centuries and local communities. However, there are budget constraints. There are high compliance and enforcement costs, as well as other concerns. Now, in modern times, the private sector, yes, the private sector has become active, as well as many other new actors. And they become important players in the delivery and management, as well as the conservation and restoration of nature. There are now a whole suite of nature finance instruments and PPP models for nature. Concession agreements, joint venture agreements, performance contracts, payment for ecosystem services, green and blue bonds. I could go on, and I won't because time is short, but I could go on, believe me. This convergence implies that both public and private sector actors have a shared interest and responsibility in ensuring the enhancement and the sustainable use and management of natural resources, as well as the protection of the ecosystems they provide. This convergence creates opportunities such as leveraging the comparative advantage and resource of different partners, creating win-win situations. Nevertheless, PPPs for nature face many challenges, such as the misalignment of interests and expectations of different partners. And of course, the huge problem of ensuring adequate governance and regulation, managing risks and uncertainties, and scaling up and replicating the successful models. It can also create imbalances, trade-offs, or unintended consequences. All of these need to be carefully addressed and mitigated by applying the principles of transparency, accountability, and most important, inclusiveness in the design and implementation of these collaborative mechanisms. So, the concept of nature as a public good needs to be adapted to these changing environments and socioeconomic conditions and to the new challenges that arise from the green transition and digital transformation. It's a lot to discuss, and I look forward to hearing from our speakers about the insights that they have gained through their various initiatives and the opportunities to see how we can best scale up forest finance. Again, grateful for all of your engagement today. Let's take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tom. So next we'll call up to the stage our last opening speaker, Ross Hampton. He's the Executive Director of the International Sustainable Forestry Coalition, which is one of the key partners for the Forest Pavilion.
Thanks so much, Christina. Everyone hearing everything well? Thank you, Dewey. Juliette Biao, you do us a great honour in your very busy schedule of opening this session for us. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great privilege to be here and very, very exciting. I just want to pay a quick tribute to the two people other than me that really thought about this and put it together. There's two very dynamic women globally that we can be very pleased thinking about this very hard for us. Mr. Yingwen Jiang did an amazing job, really fantastic job. It's a shame she couldn't be here. I know she has other commitments. And Christina Pack, for those of you who don't know, is a pocket rocket. You just get everything done with Christina. So hence, that's what you're seeing here today. And I'm sure you already know that, Thomas. You know, when I was thinking about how we got to this point, and through the course of the last couple of days, it just got more and more clear that COP itself is a bit of a metaphor for what we're trying to do this afternoon. So if, like me, you struggle to get around the corridors, you're not quite sure whether you should walk on the left or the right, you worry that you might get coffee spilt on you, it's a bit messy, it's a bit uncomfortable, but would you trade it for anywhere else in the world right now? No, you wouldn't. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with this session and generally with this process of trying to have, under UNFF's guidance, this collaborative effort to try to solve these problems, these intractable problems. It's the finance COP. This is the finance day. And I said to Christina and Yingwen, you know, how can we show that? And one of them said, well, it's a real puzzle, isn't it? And we all said, well, there you go, it is, isn't it? And the thing about that puzzle is that often you have events where just one of the pieces is speaking, if you know what I mean. You'll have an event with just philanthropy, or you'll have an event with just private sector forestry, or you'll have an event with just the multilateral development banks. And we thought, well, that's not going to ever work. If we want to change this up, because you heard from Thomas and others that more of the same is not going to change to where we need to be, well, we have to experiment with putting the pieces together. So, look, it's a small start. As Christina said, we want this to be the first step of a journey. We'd like to see this continue. But today, it's really wonderful you're here to kick this off with us. Really, as we said, we're going to make a bit of a film about this. So this is going to be like Lord of the Rings in the end, probably a trilogy. There'll be director's cuts. It's just going to go global under the wrap up, says Dewey. And I asked her to do that to speakers, and she's done it to me. Perfect work. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Ross. So now we'll move we'll move quickly into setting the stage. So we'll call our plenary speakers up to the stage. But the purpose of this session is really to delve into what forest finance means in the era of the Paris Agreement. So we'll call up Noelle O'Brien. She's the Director of Climate Change of the Asian Development Bank. So we'll have them all sit. Next, we have Ms. Dina Saleh. She's the Regional Director of the Near East, North Africa, and Europe Division of the International Fund for Agriculture and Development, one of our key development partners. And we have Christopher Marcius, who's the head of climate change. And I heard about his 3 Fs yesterday. I don't want to give it away. Maybe he'll mention it again. He's the head of the climate change for the Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry. And you may know it as C4ICRAFT. And then last but not least, we have the eminent Christina Voigt, who's the chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law. And she's also the first co-chair of the Paris Agreement Implementation and Compliance Committee. And I love it that everyone's just like really helping with the chairs so our plenary speakers feel comfortable. So the way it's going to happen is we're going to, each of them will kind of share their insights with us, 7 minutes each. So, so may I first, who would like to, so we'll call up Noelle. We'll just go by what's written down. So Noelle, yeah, you can sit there or you could go up on the lectern, whatever you feel comfortable with. So many thanks.
Sorry, can you hear me? It's Finance Day, and so you have to make sure you show up at the right place with the right statement. So. And I haven't seen anybody bring their own chair yet, so well done for being so flexible. So obviously, I think in many of these conversations we talk to the converted. You all know the topics better often than the speakers. So first of all, just a very quick reminder on why are forests important to us. Their vital role as carbon sink. We note that the Paris Agreement recognizes the importance of ecosystems for both mitigation and adaptation. Forests also provide a multitude of ecosystems, the biodiversity, the regulation of water cycles, contributions to livelihoods, economic development, and so on. There's the products and services and the whole role they play in livelihoods and nutrition. So then the question is on finance flows, and obviously working with the bank, that's an important aspect for us. So one of the biggest challenges we have with forestry is the underinvestment. So to meet the Paris Agreement goals, the agriculture, forest, and other land use sector requires a dramatic increase in annual funding. A 26-fold increase in annual funding, or approximately 423 US billion, is required by 2030 to transition to a low carbon and climate resilient trajectory. Unfortunately, the number is far lower currently. We know that the investment in forests has stagnated at about 6.6 billion per year. So we must ask the question on the kind of the range of financial sources that are required to address that gap. So we have public finance through multilateral climate funds such as the Green Fund, the Green Climate Fund, GCF, and other bilateral sources, and the fact that these are essential part of it. Private finance must also play a particular role, particularly through blended finance mechanisms. There's a role for carbon markets. There's also a role for philanthropic organizations. But I think also we must recognize the role that we as MDBs will bring, the kind of figure we're talking about coming on climate finance investment from MDBs by the year 2030 is 120 billion for LMIC countries. I think also the question of how we as MDBs work with national governments and their ministries of finance, so that on the domestic resource mobilization and the part that it's going to play in all of this investment. So maybe just focusing now on the role of nature-based solutions in protecting forests and achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. So directing investment towards nature-based solutions is a powerful strategy to boost the financial flows for forests. Nature-based solutions are actions to protect, conserve, and restore and sustainably manage or modified ecosystems, ranging from the terrestrial to freshwater, coastal, or marine. Nature-based solutions have a role for both mitigation and adaptation. They help reduce greenhouse gas emissions from deforestation and land use, capture and store atmospheric carbon dioxide, and strengthen ecosystems resilience. This in turn supports communities in adapting to climate hazards such as flooding, sea level rise, and the increasingly frequent and severe drought, heat waves, and wildfires. Scaling up nature-based solutions now could protect society from some of the most severe consequences of climate change, including the economic costs of losses and damages, and the increasing number of people who are in need of international humanitarian assistance due to these more frequent disasters. However, the ambition for nature-based solutions does not yet match the reality. Commitments to nature-based solutions have yet to translate into sufficient action on the ground due to the several barriers, including lack of government budgets and investments, challenges in implementation, and the lack of knowledge on nature-based solutions. So in terms of ADB's role in scaling up investments in nature-based solutions, we are committed to promoting nature-based solutions and scaling up investments in forest conservation and restoration. We are financing nature-based solutions. One example is of last year, we launched the Nature Solutions Finance Hub, a platform that aims to mobilize $5 billion in capital flows for nature-based solutions projects in the region, with at least 15% of that funding coming from private sector. We are also establishing a natural capital fund, which supports projects that enhance food security and natural capital, including forest restoration and sustainable land use. And the Natural Capital Lab, which is a platform to de-risk natural capital investments. Secondly, we support policy reforms and capacity building. So one of the key instruments is the policy-based lending instruments that MDBs have for working with governments. And lastly, we will be continuing to scale up our operational support. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Noelle, for providing the latest information. So I'd like to now invite Tina Saleh of IFAD to the stage to give voice to the smallholders.
So good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. I'd like to thank the organizers for bringing us together. Also, as Noelle says, it's Financing Day, so that's why we're here. But actually, more specifically, I love puzzles and I love forests. And I thought with such a distinguished panel, you know, I can't miss this opportunity. So I am Dina Saleh, the IFAD Regional Director. IFAD is the International Fund for Agriculture Development. We are an UN specialized agency, but also an international financing institution that is uniquely, and I would say, focusing on smallholder agriculture and rural development. And this is really important because when I speak to our work in this domain, you will understand why. So IFAD finances reforestation and forest conservation because it sees the role and benefits for its target group. Agriculture drives 80% of global deforestation. An increasing share of deforestation is caused by smallholders compared to large landholders. As regulation usually targets the bigger landholders, and smallholders produce the majority of forest risk commodities. Just to give you an example, 70% of these producers in cocoa, 70% in rubber, and 80% in coffee. But data also shows that when local communities participate in conservation projects, deforestation rates lower and carbon sequestration rates increase. So just IFAD since 1988 has actually incorporated agroforestry in 120 projects, covering 6% of its portfolio. Notably, the focus has been on agroforestry, which has grown with 21% of our projects between 2012 and 2022, integrating these practices into its investments. So that's really showing you that we're really taking this up, given the fact that our target group are playing a large part in deforestation. So again, recognizing the smallholders' contribution, IFAD contributes a significant amount of its investments to agroecology and sustainable land management practices, many of which include the forestry activities. But a recent stocktake found a broad IFAD support to agroecological activities at farm and landscape level, with 60% of IFAD-funded projects now supporting agroecological practices. IFAD has also recently started tracking, because another area we found that is lacking is actually having the data and having reliable data. So we started tracking the amount it commits to nature-based solutions, including reforestation, afforestation, and agroforestry, as part of our climate finance tracking. So in this cycle of what we call IFAD 12, which is 2022 to 2024, IFAD committed almost $200 million to activities that are nature-based. Agroforestry was, of course, the most important of these that were implemented. Now, to put this into context, we have supported the Great Green Wall Initiative with ambitions, among others, to restore 100 million hectares and restore 250 million of tons of carbon sequestration. And we do this through direct investments, so about 1.4 billion of active projects in our portfolio, which covers 11 of the Great Green Wall countries. And also by leading on the implementation of the Green Climate Fund and of the Global Environment Facility and the Green Wall Regional Support Programs. So in Sudan, what we did was we rolled out a natural resource governance framework. And some of the key outcomes of this was the adoption of collective community protection of communal and government forests, incentives or salary payments for forest guards. We also helped communities to register their communal forests and document documentation and activation of customary regulations, which we feel are equally important, so that farmers and farming communities can also link this work to the natural resource management work that we advocate for. And finally, we also had a collective action in resisting the establishment of a new ceramic factory on community land. So this is a concrete example of what we did in Sudan. We've also done equally work in Eritrea with the reforestation of 450 hectares of mangrove in 272 watersheds. And here, what the outcomes of this was that we saw increase in fishery resources, and also we saw a decrease in some of the commercialization, although what we're trying to do is target commercialization to sustainable commercial and marketing. Increasing, of course, in organic liquid fertilizer production, and we're currently doing the outcome survey for that. So in Mexico, we also had another example of using natural resources from common land, which increased by 37% in the forested areas. IFAD also recognizes the high upfront costs for farmers and risks for investors. So going now into the financing bit, farmers revert to deforestation or land clearing because it provides higher short-term in revenues. And this is something that we try to do and to curb. So what we did in the DRC was to grow, those who were growing coffee naturally in rainforest yields, just 2 grams of beans per plant, which is against what they would normally get if this were cultivated land, which is almost a kilo. So they were getting 2 grams of beans in growing them in the forest as opposed to having 1 kilo of beans. And this shows you the type of change that one can also bring about with these type of communities when we direct them, when we support them. So I already have to wrap up now. The last thing, as Noel was saying, how is IFAD working in deploying new financing schemes and mechanisms? We don't do policy-based loans, but what we do is really, as I said, working with governments to provide blended concessional loans and also to provide a lot of soft activities, which is training, capacity, awareness, to support communities and smallholders to be able to adopt and to be more aware of the damage of let's say, encroaching into forest lands and having a more biodiverse and ecological environment. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dina. Thank you, Dina. Next, we have Christopher Marcius, Head of Climate Change from C4 ICRAF. Chris?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be very rude after this speech because I'm unfortunately have to leave to another session that's starting soon, which is our on-site event, which I'm organizing. So I apologies for that. Second, you might think I'm going to talk about forests. Actually, basing on where I come from, but I'm actually trying to talk about transparency. Transparency as one of the cornerstones of the forest finance puzzle. I know this session is not about the puzzle, but still, transparency is extremely important to create accountability, build trust, and actually come to, before these things happen, actually come to or develop equitable decision making that is inclusive. And actually, thanks to Thomas Clark, who has mentioned all these terms already, so I'm going to expand a little bit on this. So it goes beyond procedure. Of course, the Paris Agreement has a few cornerstones and mechanisms that are talking about transparency, the enhanced transparency framework. Actually, in our next session, we're going to provide a first analysis of the biannual transparency reports, and so there are these things. But many people associate actually transparency to data, forest data, greenhouse gas emissions data, and finance flow data. And I think some of this is actually well taken care of by the banks. Banks don't want to see their money disappear, so I think that is where you get a lot of emphasis on transparency. And also in the forest and emissions data context, you see improvements. Countries moving from Tier 1 assessment, countrywide cause assessment of forest data to differentiated, localized, regionalized data. But still a lot needs to be done, but a lot also already has happened over the last 15 years. One can say that. But I think it is important to draw attention to the fact that decisions on what happens on a piece of land happen much earlier than before those agreements are being made and the funds flow. And we have seen countries coming to us and saying, yeah, we work on participation. We invited all the province heads to the capital for this discussion. But then when our teams went to the ground, talking to people in the communities didn't hear about things like RED Plus, where they were supposed to decide on what is the share of the proceeds you want to take. And they didn't even know what the mechanism was. So these things need to be addressed early on, and they need to be addressed in a comprehensive and caretaking way. We also heard countries coming to us and say, benefit sharing, wonderful. Give us a percentage. What is the percentage we should give to communities? As if there was one value, one blanket value for the whole world, which is of course not true. So it's clear that some administrative processes cost money, and there might be some money going into these things. But how much that is, and how much the communities that actually care for the forest get from this, is always matter of negotiation and debate on the ground. So I think it is important to scale forest finance. Absolutely it is. But I'm getting a bit panicking when I see that big fund flows will be moving. We are scaling this up without those things being in place. And I'm actually dreading the moment somebody is coming and saying, hey, there is this big scandal developing in country X over forest finance, because that will throw the whole endeavor into disarray and generate a lot of negative press. So we have to avoid that at all costs. And I think the pathway to that is really doing this early on. Yesterday I mentioned the 3 Fs: forests, finance. So we have those two, and they're linked to a third F, which is fairness, maybe. And so if we take that into consideration early on, and help countries also developing this approach, because there is lots, there are deficits, there's lots to be done, then we can succeed. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. I love the 3 Fs and great points about making sure that the forest finance is channeled in the right way. So next we have Dr. Christina Voigt, Chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law and the first co-chair of the Paris Agreement Implementation and Compliance Committee. Dr. Voigt, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a privilege, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. And it's been a very interesting round of presentations so far, highlighting the need to protect forests. And I think just starting off with what Dr. Juliette Biao said in the very beginning, forests are indispensable, and we all agree on that, otherwise we wouldn't be here. They're indispensable for many reasons, for biodiversity, for livelihoods, but also, of course, for our climate system. And what I will do in my couple of minutes here is to try to draw that bridge to the Paris Agreement, and you just alluded to some elements, but talking about a puzzle, I think that may also be a puzzle of how forests actually fit into the Paris Agreement. Now, you may know that the agreement as such is sector neutral. It doesn't single out any particular sectors, with the exception of forests. That's the only, if you want to call it a sector, that's the only sector that's been singled out in the Paris Agreement in Article 5. And the reasons for their that particular article was that forests are, of course, important as a mitigation option, but also the necessity to provide financial incentives to halt, stop, and reverse deforestation was something that parties considered particularly important to dedicate an entire article to forests. If you have a look at that article, you will see there are 2 elements to it. There is the first part, which talks about forests everywhere, and then there's the second part, which deals with forests in developing countries. And that's where we have anchored the entire framework around REDD+ in the Paris Agreement. And you mentioned REDD+ very briefly. When it comes to REDD+, what we do have is a robust framework around it, including safeguards that are aiming to protect indigenous peoples, but also environmental considerations in the context of implementing and deploying REDD+ activities. It's been a long time coming. It's been a long learning phase to where we are right now. And I think what we are seeing right now is a very interesting development where we have many parties that have already included forests, and in particular REDD+, in their NDCs. And we also see now the first biannual transparency reports coming forward, where parties include information on the implementation and achievement of their NDCs. It's not the data part, right? It's not the inventory part. That's also interesting. But the BTRs have another part where they have to report on how well they're doing in implementing their NDC, where now information on how well they're doing in protecting their forest, conserving their forest, is coming forward. And the interesting aspect here, I don't know if you've looked at who is already coming forward with their BTRs. They're due at the end of this year. But it's countries like Guyana and Panama, and these are core REDD+ countries, right? And the reason why they were able to put forward their BTR so early was because they had experience with monitoring, reporting, verification, everything that now every single party needs, and they could be up first. We also have the GST decision, the global stocktake decision from last year from Dubai, which very clearly now indicate the need to halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. And it also had another focus on REDD+, the need for implementing REDD+ as action, but also in the context of results-based finance. And I would like to highlight two very important developments that we've seen this year with respect, really, just very recently this year, with respect to forest finance. These are developments that I would characterize as the starting of a watershed year, a watershed moment for forest finance under the overall umbrella of the Paris Agreement. One is, as you know, REDD+ so far has been financed through bilateral agreements, and Norway, I've worked for a long time for the government of Norway, bilateral agreements, but also multilateral channels, the FCPF, UN REDD, the pilot program under the GCF. But what we have now is that the board of the Green Climate Fund just very recently in October adopted a decision to mainstream REDD+ into the results-based, or into the main modalities for regular project and program finance. This is a very important development because we don't just have a single window for REDD+, but it's becoming part and parcel of the main program finance and project finance under the GCF, which is currently, and I would have to check again, but it's currently capitalized with like $11 billion. This is new. This is absolutely new, and it's something that can really tilt the balance towards more money flowing into forest finance, results-based forest finance, in the context of REDD+ through this GCF. This is so far a proposal which still has to be elaborated by the GCF board, but we'll probably see moving forward on this in the next meeting. And secondly, here, as you perhaps know, currently there are negotiations ongoing still on carbon markets under Article 6, in particular Article 6.2, which are the bilateral trading possibilities, and Article 6.4, which is the FN mechanism, or the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism, as it's called now. And when it comes to Article 6.4, we saw a development, a very important development, at the very first day of this COP, right? When the governing body, that's the CMA under the Paris Agreement, adopted a decision which took note of standards that were developed by the supervisory body for the 6.4 mechanism about a month ago. And it's a standard on the methodologies for carbon trading, it's a standard for removals, and there's also a sustainable development tool which didn't have to go through the CMA. But what is important, and which is perhaps not so obvious, there is now a very specific reference to REDD+ in the standards for methodologies, where it said that if you undertake REDD+ activities and you want to get carbon credits for them, you have to comply with the framework for REDD+, as well as with all the requirements for Article 6.4. That's important, and that's a very, very recent development, which means that single projects for REDD+ will have to be nested within the national REDD strategy, within the national monitoring system, within the national forest reference level, so it cannot be double counted, and it's hopefully also a guarantee against leakage. So the other finance channel is through carbon markets, which was just opened really under Article 6.4 at the very first day of this COP. Of course, we still have to see how much this is going to be deployed by parties and private actors which are able to participate in Article 6.4. But the combination of the signal from the GCF and the signal from carbon markets may, what I call, cause that watershed moment of forest finance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A big round of applause for our plenary speakers who have really framed the puzzle discussions that's forthcoming. So thank you so much. And now we will move to putting the forest puzzle together piece. And I'll hand the mic over to my colleagues. Sharmila? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Bye, Christopher.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to see you. Thank you very much to everyone for being here. It's nice to be among these trees of little SDG building blocks as well, I think, as we put this puzzle together. So without further ado, I think we'll get started. We'll start putting up the first piece, and we'll invite our speakers, as well as the piece of the puzzle on public finance. We have with us Chen Jie, Associate Professor at the Chinese Academy of Forestry and NFGA in China, as well as Alessandra Lehmann, who's President of the Environmental Law Commission and of the Brazilian Bar. If we could invite you to take a seat and share your views, please. We'd especially like to invite you to first maybe, Ross, if you'd like to do the photo. Yeah. So if we could invite you first to just take a picture with the piece before we put it up.
Remember, it's like Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah. So maybe there? Yeah, that's perfect. On the top. So on top? Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. You can... Nope. There we go. Thank you, dear.
Chenji? You?
Yep. Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, if we could invite you to take a seat now and you can share your views, Ms. And we can start with you, Ms. Chenji. Yeah. Yeah, if you want to go to the podium. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm so happy. It's a pleasure for me to, be here with you to talk about public finance. And I think that you all remember what the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antinado and Guterres said on 12th November. It said that the public finance is scant for countries eager to act, and also called for the public finance, to increase the public finance and to find ways to explore more public finance for the developing countries. So here I would like to share what the case of China, to showcase the importance of the public finance, to see how the public finance can facilitate this sustainable forest management and mobilize and leverage the finances from different sources for the forestry climate actions. Please. Yeah. Actually, China made the commitment of the net zero emission and forest and grassland sectors in the part of the framework. In 2009, we can say that China promised that by 2020, the forest areas will increase by increased by 40 million hectares, and the forest stock volume will increase by 1.3 billion cubic meters. And in 2015 and 2021, the commitment has been updated twice. You can see that the focus has shifted from the increase of the forest areas as well as the increase of the forest stock volume. From 2015, China just put the focus on the increase of the forest stock, and it said the 2015 commitment said that the forest stock volume will increase by 4.5 billion cubic meters by 2030, and this commitment was updated in 2021 to 6 billion cubic meters. Please, next. And to fulfill these commitments, China has taken a lot of effort and done a lot of things. First, in 2009, the CPC Central Committee just gave the strategic position of forestry to say that forestry is the strategic action to achieve science-based development, the primary mission to build ecological civilization, and the strategical choice of addressing climate change. So since then, China just developed, drafted a lot of the plans, the targeted plans to promote the increase of forest areas and enhancement of the forest quality, and large number of the projects, programs has been implemented. And you know that the program and the project requires a large amount of the finance. So public finance has played a very, very important, very massive role in promoting the development of forests in China. Please, next. And you can see that the public finance in China for the forest has three. I think that is three characteristics. The first one is the quick increase of the public finance. Actually, from 2008 to 2012, 22, the total forest investment has increased by 289%, but the public finance has increased by 359%. So public has increased much quickly than the total forest investment. The second characteristic is that the public finance has taken increasing share of the total forest investment. Actually, the total forest investment in the 15 years is about 816 billion US dollars, but the public finance for forests is about 405 billion US dollars, accounting almost half of the total forest investment. And you can see that from this figure, you can see that the public finance is just taking up and increasing share of the total investment. Until 2022, the share is more than 60%. And the last characteristic of this public finance for forests in China is that the public finance forest has a very, very substantial crowding in fact. So that means the public finance just play a very good role to scale up the forest investment, and also to increase the forest investment from the private sectors. So that's the characteristics of the public finance in China. And the last slide, please. And you can see that yeah, public finance is very important. The case of China just verified that public forests play the significant role in mobilizing climate finance. Yeah, from different sources. Actually, the Global Forest Goal Report 2021 also had a conclusion that most countries, yeah, just mobilize the more public funds than private funds, and the public funds just have a more massive role in promoting the sustainable forest management. But you know that public finance, we say that China's case shows that the public finance is very important, but it's not, doesn't mean that international public finance is not so important. Actually, China also uses the national and international public funds, even though national public funds accounted for 90%, only maybe less 1% from international public funds. But because China has a bit capacity to make the investment, and so China just withdraw from the competition for international public finance, just to give the space and the room for other developing countries. So last one point I want to say that international public finance is very, very important for developing countries, especially the least developed countries. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chen. And now we're delighted to hear from where the UNFCCC Corp will go next. We're happy to have Professor Alessandra Lehmann with us. Alessandra, over to you.
Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. So thank you so very much for having me here today and for the opportunity to say a few words from a Latin American perspective, and particularly from a Brazilian perspective, in the lead up to COP30 in Belém next year. So what I wanted to do today is try and convey 5 ideas in 5 minutes, pieces of the larger puzzle, if you will. So the first idea that I would like to convey, and this might seem a bit obvious, but I don't think we're quite there yet, is we need to redirect finance, be it public, private, or blended, to activities that are first not detrimental to climate goals. So at the very minimum, I think we need a do no harm approach. And further, of course, we need activities to help foster a just climate transition. Second idea is that forest finance is extremely relevant for countries like Brazil and other countries of Latin America, particularly because of our emissions profile, which is largely dependent on deforestation and land use. And so for this reason, initiatives like the TFFF, the Tropical Forest Finance Facility, which is a pay-for-performance multilateral sovereign wealth fund, which was launched by Brazil during the Brazilian G20 presidency, and it's expected to become operational next year by COP30. So this type of initiative is extremely important in the region to ensure an adequate flow of resources. Third idea might also seem a bit obvious, but I think we need to have a clear understanding of what actually counts as climate finance, because as you probably know, climate finance can be assessed through several, sometimes conflicting criteria. So by type of finance instruments, be it development aid, equity, or debt, whether it's provided by market or concessional rates, by origin, by direction, whether it's additional, and whether it is effectively linked to climate projects. Fourth idea, as a climate lawyer, I think it's important for us to consider the role of the law in general and of litigation in particular, in forest protection and forest finance. So as a matter of fact, in Brazil, the very first cases, climate cases that reached the Brazilian Supreme Court were actually cases challenging the governance and failure to disburse funds of both the climate funds the Climate Fund and the Amazon Fund. So with the Brazilian Supreme Court finding that the executive branch has a constitutional obligation to allocate such funds. And finally, first, fifth and last idea, I think what I would like to see as an outcome of COP29 is we must pave the way from Baku to Berlin so that we can take the finance progress that we'll hopefully achieve at COP29 and develop it even further next year at the heart of the Amazon rainforest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alessandra, and thank you to both Shenjie and Alessandra for your remarks and starting us off by filling out the puzzle. If I can invite you to take your seats back. We can move to the next piece of the puzzle, where we're especially delighted with us two speakers to talk about the value of an enabling environment, and we have the piece here with us now. So if we can call our speakers to the stage, we have Wang Guosheng, Professor, Academy of Forestry and Grassland Inventory and Planning of the NFGA in China, as well as Professor Marie-Claire Cordonnier-Segot, Chair in Sustainable Development Law and Policy and Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC COP29 Climate Law and Governance Initiative. Professor Cordonnier-Segot, Professor Guosheng, if we can invite you to first hold the piece and help us fill out the puzzle for a photograph. Which side are you picking? You have to pick a side? Yeah? There we go. Okay. Oh, lovely. Yeah.
It's okay. It can be not quite on. You can fix it with that. Just hang on. We're trying to get it.
Yeah.
There we are. That looks great.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you very much. So now with the puzzle starting to form, I can have the side. Yep. Great. Yep. No, that's fine. That's okay. That's okay. Yeah. With the puzzle starting to form, we're especially glad to have Professor Wang Guosheng. If we can invite you to share a few words at the podium. Yes, of course. I do.
Oh. Okay. Thanks the Forest Pavilion invite me take this presentation. 有吗? Okay. I think this topic is very difficult for me to answer. This is my understanding what the environment for the forest finance. Okay. First, I think that the enabling environment of the forest finance, this covers the wide areas. This includes national political views and commitment. Secondly, is the international rules and domestic law. Third, is the international arrangement or institutional capacity building. Third, is the forestry governance system. Fifth, is the social participation, including the public and private sectors. Fourth, sixth is the capacity building and the technology support for the forestry program. This is my understanding what the environment consists of area. I think that in these areas, the most important is the national political wills and commitment and the climatic factors for forest finance. Second part of the, I think the challenge of the and the opportunity for how to improvement in value environment for forest finance. First, about the challenge. This is the first challenge is developed countries. That's a lack of the strong political will and provide financial support to meet the commitment and the Paris Agreement. Secondly, forestry governance system in some developed countries need improvement. Third, capacity and technology in pro sectors in developed countries should be enhancement. The second opportunity, this is a number of the global forestry finance have been established, include Red Plus or Green Climate Fund. And also, this has key rules in the forestry finance. The second is now in this COP29 is new collected quantify of the goals. Now is negotiations. This is also will provide opportunity to our to the forestry finance. Third is the international carbon market, where we provide new opportunity to and a channel for the forest finance. The third part, I just give very brief how Chinese government provide enabling environment for the forestry finance in China. The China have established serious law in forest and ecosystem protections, such as forest law and grassland law. That's made a solid foundation for the provide long-term and the stable finance support for the forestry development in China. Second, China is very serious in fully established of the country's climate change and the program and the planning, especially in the goals set by the NDC in 2030 for the forestry sectors address climate change, include of the potential planning of the forestry development, national forestry management. Third, the China have set up the CCER that include carbon trade in carbon sink of the afforestation and mangrove. This is my understanding. Three parts of the how to improve the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Guosheng. We're delighted now to invite Professor Marie-Claire Cordonnier-Seger to the stage for a few words.
Thank you very much, Professor. And thank you also especially to Tom and Christina and my colleagues from IFAD and others who have organized this incredibly important event. I know most of you because of Climate Law and Governance Day, which of course is taking place tomorrow entirely online with over 3,300 registrants from 160 countries, where many of you will be speaking, and we appreciate it. But I should start by saying, if we are here talking about the law and enabling environments in countries all over the world, the place I grew up is forested. It's a tiny island off the west coast of Canada. And the ancient temperate forests, when I was 14 and 15, were being logged at an unsustainable rate that called us Brazil of the North. And that was actually unfair because we were faster than them at that time in destroying the forests. We started our hunger strikes. For me, it was 26 days. We started our blockades. I was 15 the first time I was arrested. We changed the law. We put in place a new practices code for our forests, the first time ever having a forest practices code. We put in place a forest renewal policy for the workers to transition, what we would now call a just transition. We put in place a conservation plan, a protected areas strategy, where we tripled the size of the parks. Those forests that we fought to protect are burning. They're burning because of climate change. Those young people who stood with me on the blockades, those indigenous leaders, the woodworkers who wanted to create jobs, not just stop them from being lost, they're just as angry as I am. This is an incredibly important work that is being done here, and I commend you all for it. Now, in terms of what I can contribute today as a professor of international law at the University of Cambridge and chair of this Climate Law and Governance Initiative, I think there would just be 3 points that I would like you to take home, plus one invitation. The first, obviously, has to do with courage. And here I would like to recognize especially my colleague, Christina Voigt, who, together with her, I'm stealing some of these ideas from a book that we've just finished writing with many colleagues over the last 9 years that will be coming out next year, Courage, Contributions and Compliance, the new research handbook on climate law and governance. But the courage is needed for the institutional and legal reform at all levels. 169 of our 186 nationally determined contributions in this round that we're just finishing of NDCs called on countries to make legal and institutional reforms binding in their countries in order to even just reach their NDC. We're now meant to go progressively more ambitious, and there are so many options available. Not just laws to be able to put in place and firm up our commitments to nature-based solutions, the rules for REDD+, for community and local stakeholder engagement, and for nature-positive investment and monitoring, reporting, and verification, but also changes in the rules that we have for finance in terms of climate risk disclosure for companies, particularly forestry companies like the ones I used to meet on the blockades at 6 o'clock in the morning in the summer rain, but everyone. And also the rules that we need to change in terms of setting up and making sure that it's functional, the architecture for those carbon markets. And Christina Pack, Christina Squared, who is here, is doing some incredibly important work there, as are many of you. I think we need to look and keep looking at subsidies reform, moving from fossil fuel subsidies, which are still numbering in the billions in all of our countries, to subsidies for not just clean energy, but also those nature-based solutions. And there's a great deal that even trade and investment law can contribute there. We're actually meant to be good at reducing trade-distorting subsidies. And goodness knows that the forest ones are right now needing that dial to be moved. And then finally, of course, but just as important in terms of legal institutional reform and that courage, we're going to have to work together with all communities on land tenure and on forest concessions and on the actual deals that got the forestry minister, whose office I occupied at 14, indicted when the government changed because he'd been taking bribes. And if we look seriously at that, we also have to look seriously at Indigenous laws and customary laws and the laws of the communities that are the stewards of those forests, and in a respectful way. So that courage point is incredibly important. But my second point out of 3 is courts. And as you know, we live in troubling times. Politics are changing. And what we need to be able to do is to count on our courts and the climate litigation that is following. I understand over 230 cases just last year alone. Part of that climate litigation, though, also means defending the defenders, because people are paying sometimes the ultimate price, lawfare, persecution, even murder, including in our host country next year, in order to be able to stand up as litigators and defend the forest communities and others, including those who are defending the young people like I once was. And then finally, capacity. And this is where I think world-leading universities should be doing a great deal more. Together with ADB, IFAD, and other colleagues, we're trying, we're starting. At the University of Cambridge, we're leading a Democratizing Global Education initiative, which is actually opening online courses for 23,000 people, mainly highly climate developable country law and policy leaders, current and future generations, so we're allowed to bring in the law students with bursaries. And we're offering online education about not just the Paris Agreement, but as we go further, carbon markets and forest finance together with our partners. But a great deal more needs to be done. And that's where I'll add that last closing point, which is that yes, courage, yes, courts, yes, capacity to deal with this climate crisis, but we also need that collaboration. What you're doing here today in this pavilion is part of an enabling environment. It's the cornerstone of an enabling environment. It's crucial. So I'm going to say thank you to everyone here for everything that you are doing. I'm going to invite you to join online even just for an hour when Tom is speaking or when Christina is chairing in the Climate Law and Governance Day tomorrow. You can just log on from a hallway. And I'm also going to suggest especially that if at all possible, we not just redouble our efforts, but at least in the name of that 14-year-old who stood on that blockade and was taken to jail before she could even vote for standing up for her forest, we recommit. And I think it's worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Cordonier-Seger and Professor Gosheng, for your words and for your inspiring remarks on what it takes to create an enabling environment. We're almost halfway through the puzzle, so thank you for your words. We can invite you to take your seats back. We're almost halfway through the puzzle, so now we're glad to get back to other stakeholders who we can take along in this field and turn to private sector forestry. We have with us Kazuhiko Kamada, Senior Managing Executive of OG Holdings, and also Todd Stevens, Executive Director of Markets with the Wildlife Conservation Society. If we could invite you up first to put up the piece of the puzzle that you're going to be speaking about. Excellent. Thank you very much. And Mr. Kamada, if we can start with you, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Kazuhiko Kamada. I'm OG Holdings, one of the directors. I'm very pleased to come here to make a participate as a private sector. So, okay, thank you very much. So, who we are. I want to briefly explain what is OG. OG is a private company established 150 years, very old company, making the paper manufacturing. So we are listed in the Tokyo Stock Exchange market. So if you need more information, please access to the ogholding.com. So we are the largest paper manufacturer in Japan. As you know, paper is made from wood fiber. So OG has a philosophy. So those who use trees must plant trees. So we started strategic forestry operation since early 19th centuries. Today, people talking a lot about the SDGs issue, but our company, having such kind of a philosophy more than 100 years ago. So next slide. So we are always thinking how to improve the value of a forest. So this slide is showing our fundamental function is a forest. So to produce a product from the forest, this is kind of two-way environmental friendly packages and wood bio businesses. Initially, firstly, forest functions. Company owns around 640,000 hectares of plantation forest in the 7 countries now. Then about 25% of this 640,000 hectares are company reserved as a conservation forest. And even though the remaining 75% of industrial forest, we harvest the tree immediately after that, and we planted the tree. So all of forest is always covered by green vegetation. We never, ever destroy the forest. So then we are to make more value on the forest by 2 ways in the environmental friendly packaging. So you can see on the left side of the it's kind of small picture, they're very hard to see, but this product, it looks like a kind of plastic, but not. It's all 100% made by paper. And then we, not only the paper, we added some special function on the paper. So like same as a barrier function as a plastic. So even the paper, we can use, you can replace, totally replaced by plastic. So in our calculation, by this way, replacing the plastic by paper, we can reduce about 70% of CO2 in a lifetime. And also the right side, the wood bio business is, this is an idea. We are now working every day, and our R&D team working on it, and to make, to utilize wood fiber to produce more variable products, like even not only the paper, but also the other products, like ethanol. We are already success to produce ethanol from the wood fiber. So, and actually, this is not only laboratory level, but also we already started to construct a much bigger plantation factory to produce ethanol from wood fiber, and its operation going to start next month. So then, after several years, probably we can start to produce more commercial basis ethanol made from wood fiber. Then ethanol can be used as a SAF, SAF. Probably everybody knows. Then the aviation fuel, sustainable aviation fuel. So think about, we can fly the aircraft by wood. So, and also we want to, we are thinking about to everybody talking about the forest value isn't talking about the forest value, talking about only carbon credit, but our company thinking forest has more value, not only the carbon credit, but also the other elements like biodiversity, soil conditions, and nutrients, and water purification. So this kind of other elements should be people think about the more value, same as value other than the carbon, not only the carbon credit, but think about this value of other elements. So we are now working on with the university and then other venture companies to visualize the other elements. This is a kind of wonderful example. On the left side, it's showing the water flow on the surface and also the underground. we are mapping on our own forest in Japan, part of, not all, but some part of our own forest in Japan, and mapping, making a layer on the mapping to find out how much water flow, surface and underground on our forest. Then we find that it's about 17 million people's 1 day's consumption of water is flowing our forest, equivalent to that. Then also the right-hand side is it's showing it's a map of Japan, and we are mapping our forest on the showing how much endangered species is living in the forest, our forest, and then it's showing about 3,000 species, including 1,400 very rare species predicted to inhabit our forest. So through our daily operation, we are protecting this endangered species also. Then I believe I want this kind of things is also should be counted as a value of a forest. And then by this visualization and transparency and the credibility of data. So we want to make it as a kind of another credit. Then make a forest more valuable things. But not only by itself, it's very difficult. But we need a partner to do that. And then also I want ISFCs to work more hard, to more take an initiative to work on this kind of variation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kazuhiko. If we can invite now Todd Stevens to take the floor and talk to us about his perspectives from the WCS.
Hello, my name's Todd Stevens. I work for the Wildlife Conservation Society in New York City, and it is very strange that you had an NGO speaker to talk about private forests, but maybe that reflects my job. So WCS is a conservation implementation organization, and my job is to work with our field staff to think about how to work with the private sector. So I'm going to talk a little bit about private forest's role potentially in the kind of conservation that we need here at COP. So the first thing I want to say is that about forest concessions, which is like, for me, sort of the main sort of issue with regard to private forests in the tropical belt, they play an incredibly important conservation role, and they can play that if they are actively managed, well managed, and selectively logged. And so I want to say that there's a series of successes we've had in the Republic of Congo working with private forest concession operators who are part of a larger landscape of protection that includes both protected areas, both community lands, but also private forests. But sometimes it's not enough, our typical practices, because as we heard some of our earlier speakers, current practices are not good enough. How do we change the practices in private forests? That's what the finance is supposed to be for. Without the finance, things will go on as usual, and we don't want that. So I think one thing I want to say is, first, I think conservation finance, specifically debt for nature swaps, sustainability-linked bonds, they need metrics of success. They need to show either carbon or biodiversity or soil, or many of the things that were shown by my friend here up there. They can be linked to bonds that are actually one of the fastest growing categories of fixed income. So that's one. And the second thing is that many of our forest concessions around the world have been through one, maybe two rounds of cutting. The next round of cutting is going to be catastrophic. They've taken the highest value timber out of places, but yet that next round of cutting would produce the largest climate savings if it can be changed. There are many private forest concessions that are out there that are on the brink of either becoming huge conservation successes or truly difficult places because it's taken another 100 years to get back what we had. So that's one thing I'll say. I have 8 minutes, so I want to go quickly. The second thing is that I think sometimes when we say private forests, we think private corporations. But yet village forests and community forests are some of the largest and most important places for us in terms of carbon, biodiversity, and people. So that's a place where I think the civil society as well as maybe the private sector might think about, because those are forests that are usually managed for subsistence. How do we change the fuel wood equation that those village forests operate on? And that can be a clean energy solution that many of us have talked about. How do you change that in a way that those funds are directed into saving those forests, which also provide those communities water, clean air, and a whole series of cultural things as well. So when we talk about private forests, I think you can see climate finance stepping in and clean energy coming in to help village and communities save their forests. We've had some success with that in Tanzania, in Cameroon, you know, places that really do have sort of relatively sort of low per capita income. I think those solutions are scalable. The final thing I want to talk about is, I talk about local communities, but also indigenous groups have been granted tenure over very large pieces of forest that are crucial for any sort of success that we're going to have. So those are forests that we might, so we use acronyms, it's super fun here in Baku, and so HFLD, High Forest Low Deforestation. That means the good actors. That means actors without actually climate finance have made some decisions over the past millennia to keep those forests high integrity. One of the issues we have at COP, we have it every year, I've been here 20 years, is how are we going to provide finance for them for doing what they are already doing? WCS has pioneered a sort of a unit, which is called HIFOR. It's a stewardship unit. I really would beg you guys to go pay attention to the conversations that are being had about stewardship. It's a very important that we also see our trees as HFLD crediting, but if we don't invest in a way that is measurable, in a way that is long-term, we have a very difficult argument with our own selves, our own integrity, with our communities we come from, as well as with those indigenous groups, about why they should continue the practices that they have continued. So, I mean, I can talk a little more about HIFOR. We're doing pilots in the Republic of Congo and Brazil, but fundamentally what we're trying to say is, while that is, we don't have a secondary market to go trade on that, it is not an offset. We are not asking sort of the people who have done damage to buy it. We're asking people who see a common good in our ecosystems maintaining their integrity and the world systems providing this. We can talk a lot about who those people are, but I'd say it's pretty much all of us. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kazuhiko and Todd Stevens, for all your words. We're halfway through the puzzle now, and you can see it's forming shape. To shepherd us through the other stakeholders involved, we're delighted to have with us Sharmila Ramaswamy, Senior Counsel at the World Bank, and I'll hand over the floor to her.
Thank you, Tejas. Hi, everybody. All right, so we're moving on to the next piece of the puzzle. We have the institutional investors team coming up now. If I could introduce Mr. Jeffrey Sito and invite him up. Hi, Jeffrey. And just maybe while Jeffrey's getting situated, how about a show of hands? Any other institutional investors here? No, I'm afraid not. So you're alone. Okay, here's the piece of the puzzle.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I know I'm the last one here between you and a drink or dinner, so I'll try and be brief in my 10 minutes. My name is Jeffrey Sito. I'm responsible for the emerging markets business of New Forests. For that is Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Just a little bit about New Forest. It's not an ad, but we're one of the largest nature-based and land managers, investment managers in the world. We have about $8 billion under management. We control about 1.5 million hectares of forestry and 3.1 million hectares of agricultural property. And we have strategies across California, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and Africa. We play in 3 compliance markets, which is California, Australia, and New Zealand. And in the emerging markets, I'm responsible for, under voluntary, the market regimes and capacity building and that. So I just want to share the vision. The vision is to see investment in land use and forestry as central to the transition to a sustainable future. And so what does that sustainable future look like? What is the role of sustainable land management in our path to net zero? And I would like to commend Kamada-san and some of the earlier speakers about talking about nature, not just in the context of carbon, but in all that nature provides. And our ability to price that and value all those different things, whether it's carbon now, biodiversity in the future, and other types of ecosystem services, water purification, etc., is crucial to the transition to a sustainable future. So what does nature-based solution provide? It can provide up to 37% of the mitigation needed by 2030 to achieve Paris targets globally. So how do we do this? And how do we drive more investment as an institutional investor into the sector? And I think that's a whole confluence of things in environment and built ecosystems. And the previous speakers have spoken about that. But if you think of forestry, traditional forestry, the provision of timber and fiber as the ultimate renewable resource, you have forestry in terms of a nice little portfolio diversifier. It's not correlated to other markets. There's low volatility of returns. It has inflation hedging characteristics and positive ESG attributes. So what is going to drive the next level? How do we get to climate change mitigation at scale? How do we preserve our nature? Well, firstly, we've talked about the private sector involvement. And we draw parallels to the infrastructure sector. So my previous role was in infrastructure. And when governments in the infrastructure sector in the 80s and 90s realized that they could no longer afford to provide infrastructure, toll roads or roads and ports and bridges, they turned to the private sector and they had public-private partnerships and other things. So the privatizations in Australia and the UK paved the way for an asset class that now, with private sector involvement, is worth trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, and every fund in the world wants to be in it. And that's where we get our financing, because that's where the big pools of capital are. So how do we enable that? I think some of the others have already spoken about that. So the tailwinds now that's going to help grow our business is climate change mitigation in the first instance. And so when we talk about carbon and biodiversity opportunities, we talk about contribution to nature positive outcomes, and we talk about new market opportunities and the circular bioeconomy. So when New Forest invests into an asset, we aim to achieve 3 goals, in addition to obviously making a profit and generating a return for our investors. The first is, what is the contribution of our wood, our timber, our fiber as a renewable resource to the circular bioeconomy? Wood as the renewable resource, fiber, biofuels, biomass. There's a chart, you can make anything out of wood, fiber. And so that in and of itself, sustainably intensively managed tree plantations can displace the harvesting of natural forests and ecosystems, because now we are getting more out of the same hectare of land and growing it back again. It displaces high emission products like concrete and steel in the built environment. And there are a whole bunch of other things, sustainable aviation fuel and so on and so forth. So the circular bioeconomy. The second is, how do we achieve additional impact outcomes with intentionality? So I heard one of the previous speakers, our first fund was a do no harm. We want to do more good. And so how do we do that? How do we target with intentionality climate mitigation, biodiversity, and conservation and preservation, and livelihoods and life on the land and communities? Because that social license to operate is the most important part of our business. So I think that is the second consideration. And the third thing we target is shared prosperity. And what that means to New Forests is that the stakeholders and communities on the ground are just as important, and the outcomes are just as important as the nurses and teachers that give their money to pension plans for their retirement. So we consider these all in totality. We have a very holistic approach to that. And I think that is something that's not lost. You know, pension funds aren't the evil money. They're the ones that, I've got 2 minutes, so I better speed up a little bit. And so what is that approach? So we have a mixed landscape approach. And a mixed landscape approach is about maximizing the use of that landscape. So invariably you'll have elements of conservation, invariably you'll have an industrial tree plantation, there'll be processing, they may be riparian boundaries and conservation and biodiversity areas, there may be a biodiversity corridor, which we also have, but also that community engagement piece. And by valuing every piece of that land and optimizing that land use, we can do more with what we have. That's the first thing. The second part of that is that if you can value the land for all that it provides, it competes against conversion and other types of land use. So you get the forest staying in as forests. So that was my second point. And so with that mixed landscape approach, how do we then fund this? So our Tropical Asia Forest Fund 2, which is our second fund in Asia, uses a blended finance approach that actively targets pools of capital, not necessarily philanthropic, but pools of capital seeking different outcomes. Some may be impact, some may be financial return, and catalyzing the large pension plans and where the real money needs to be driven into climate change mitigation. And so when we think about our second fund, we have foundations, the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, the Hempel Foundation. We have sovereign wealth funds, Gen Zero and Temasek. We have corporates seeking to do more good, and so on and so forth. So we've put all these people together into a blended finance fund. It's a concessional capital structure to be able to not only catalyze more into the space, but also to achieve those positive impact outcomes. And to show the model that impact is not necessarily a cost to business, and they are hand in hand, either as risk management or the ability to generate a greater return. And it's only by proving out that model that we are able to mobilize the trillions of dollars that we need. They exist, I know, because you've seen it in infrastructure, that we need to drive into that space. Because I'm not here to do one project. We are here to show it works and bring everyone along with us to do 1,000, 1,000,000 projects, because that is exactly what is required today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sito. So let's move on to the next piece of the puzzle. We have our development banks. And I'm pretty sure there are some development banks here because I'm here. How about show of hands? Anybody from a development bank? Yes. So if I could invite Graham Watkins from the Inter-American Development Bank. He's Division Chief for Climate Change. And also Mr. Yonganil from the FMO. He's the CEO. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Right. And Mr. Martin Lemoyne, who is the Head of Agri-Finance Private Sector Operations Department at the Asian Development Bank. And closing the puzzles.
Fix it in a bit. That's okay. Okay.
Nicely done. Nicely done. All right. So if you want to take a seat, and let's start with Graham. Graham, if you want to go to the podium, thank you. Oh, you need the... If you want to take a seat, and let's start with Graham. Graham, if you want to go to the podium, thank you. Oh, you need the... Do you need anything?
No. Good to go. Okay. Should I start?
Yes, please go. Go ahead.
All right. I'm going to start trying to do this as quickly as possible. I know everybody's probably getting tired. I certainly am. I'm going to do three things. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Amazon because we have mentioned it a little bit. I'm going to talk about our approach as an MDB to dealing with forests. And then the last thing I want to do is to talk about some of the challenges. And that's going to build on previous discussions. So on the Amazon, one thing we haven't mentioned on the urgency side is that the Amazon is actually at a point of bifurcation. tipping points that if you push it too far, you're going to flip it completely in one direction, you're going to lose the whole thing. We've already modeled that and calculated that you're looking at costs. If you want to see numbers, you're looking at $257 billion of losses, just to let that sink in. If you flip it the other way, you're actually looking at $339 billion of benefits. So this is a big shift to think about. For that reason, we have a program called Amazon Forever, which is really focused on people. And I want to emphasize this. This is really focused on the matrix between the protected areas, making that work. Because if that doesn't work, the protected areas don't work. It's a dedicated unit that works with us, but it works across all partners, particularly with indigenous peoples, local communities, civil society in general, and private sector. So it brings all that together. How much are we bringing together there? About $1 billion of our own capital was our original commitment. That's gone now to $4.2 billion. So you can raise money for doing these things. We also brought together national development banks. So the numbers have now gone, our $4.2 billion, leveraging 10 to 20 billion by 2030. So it is possible to bring money to these questions and fairly large sums of money. That's a little bit on the Amazon. Our approach mirrors, our broader approach mirrors that. We provide about $100 million of technical assistance every year. What's that technical assistance for? It's actually for that enabling and public finance side, to actually get the public finance directed, but also create enabling circumstances for private finance, which we already talked about. You have to build institutional capacities. You need to bring in modeling skills. You need to bring in ways of changing policies and regulations that are actually going to work, and learn that. And to be honest, you have to do that with ministries of finance. Ministries of environment need to be there, but it's the ministries of finance that are going to take decisions. We also mainstream in our operations. At Kali, we announced that we basically delivered about $2 billion in 2023 of nature finance. So you can use our own operations as the basis for moving the agenda forward. That's a pretty big chunk of our total finance. And that goes from doing linear infrastructure properly all the way across to nature-based solutions. But here's the greatest challenge. Unless we come up with a model that works, that is different from agriculture, business as usual, we will not solve this problem. You have to have a different way of using standing forest. That's been said several times. We need it, and we really don't have it quite yet, because that's the only way you're going to scale the change over time. We can also continue to pilot innovative finance, and we're really experimenting in that area. Debt for nature conversions, you're talking about on the order of $400 million that you can bring in through those kinds of processes. So I'm using the numbers just so you can scale it a little bit. Forest carbon partnership facilities, so working with the World Bank system, $50 million for Guatemala. It's a fair amount of money. Thematic bond structures, which have already been mentioned, $130 million for the Colombia-Jaguar corridor. So they're not small amounts of money, and they can actually be very, very helpful and very strategic as you move forward. So that's kind of how we work. So basically, build a policy capacity, the institutional capacity, look at mainstreaming in our own operations, and then pilot innovative finance. Challenges, and I will finish on this. It is not easy to change policy. It is not, you don't go in and say, hey guys, let's change it. It is huge. It's a big transformational change. It is very hard to do. Warning number one. Things like Brazil's ecological transition plan is a huge step forward. Things like Parás Amazonas Agora is a huge step forward. Let's recognize it and help them, because this is hard. It's very hard. Complications of policies. I think it was Marie-Claire that mentioned this, and I want to stick on it. Subsidies. What is the biggest thing you can deal with to actually change the playing field so that you rebalance? Deal with the subsidies to not sustainable agriculture. What is the hardest thing to do? Deal with the subsidies to non-sustainable agriculture. Because you pull those subsidies, then you're going to affect productivity, food security, and a whole bunch of other things. Very complicated shifts you have to deal with. Complications on financial innovation. Carbon markets are complicated. They require huge institutional changes. It ain't easy. I keep getting frustrated by the EU coming out to us and saying, yeah, you need EUTS. It's easy. It took you 65 years to put that in place. 50 years to start working together and 15 more years to put it in place. Don't ask Latin America and the Caribbean to put that in place in 5 years. It ain't going to happen. It's complicated, hard to do. We've already mentioned the things about safeguards, benefit flows to communities, measuring real impacts. All of these issues are hitting newspapers daily. Just take a look. It is hard to do this stuff. And final note, look, I'm older than a lot of people here, believe it or not. I remember Rio. I remember 32 years ago. There was a big move, biodiversity finance, lots of money flowing in. What happened? Why are we back here? I advise you to take a look. There's a lovely book by a woman called Carlota Perez. She's 84 years old now, but she's amazing. She's still completely lucid. Venezuela. She wrote a book on how revolutions happen. What is one of the warning signs of revolutions? Bubbles. Financial bubbles, where you get a disconnect between the financing world and the real economy. What are those? What you're probably more familiar. .com bubble, canal bubble, railway bubble. There's the housing bubble in the United States. Thing called tulip mania. Wrapping up. I'm finishing right now. The Roaring '20s. This is what happens. You can't stop it from happening. But again, look at the newspapers. We have to be very careful. And this comes back to Chris's point on transparency. It's crucial. We really need to think about this in that sense. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to Michael Young-Neil.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for your time. I'll try to be even more brief. And I'm not sure if it's allowed, but I would be happy to take 1 or 2 questions, because we've been throwing all this information at you and I have no clue if what I'm saying is actually interesting to you. So I'll say a couple of things and then prepare if you want to have a question. And I'm looking at if we get that working. Okay, so
a little bit of a
good. Very quickly, I represent FMO, which is a Dutch development bank, kind of small country, 15 billion assets under management we have. I happen to be the CEO, and I have my own little forest. And why do I have my own little forest? Because I calculated my own footprint, and I thought, okay, I drive electric, I eat vegetarian, there's still something left. Practice what you preach. So I bought a little small forest. Lucky me. So if you are in an organization and your CEO or your management director is all about net zero and forest, challenge him or her whether he or she is net zero. Anyway. Good. Let me give you 2 things. Blended finance was already mentioned, super important. We do 2 things here. We work with the UK government, but you're a Dutch development bank, yes, correct. We've been doing forestry since 2011, so we're looking at cross-boundary collaboration, and it's called MFF, Mobilizing Finance for Forest. Have a look at it. It's a very interesting structure. I'm not going to tell you. If you're really interested, you'll find it. Another one, I think it's even more interesting because it goes to the next piece of the puzzle. It's called DFCD, the Dutch Fund for Climate Development. Why is it so interesting? We work there together with SNV and with WWF. So we work together with 2 NGOs. And what they basically do, they prepare the ground and they help us to create these nature-based solutions or forestry solutions to make them bankable. Because that's the problem. We're throwing with billions in all these commitments, but we need to kind of make it work on the ground. And there is, in the end, more money than there is actually programs. And I'm very happy to hear the couple of examples here. But if that 100 billion a year really comes at work, we cannot deploy. So it's super important, and we as a development bank, we have TA available and we also try to do that. But have a look at that DFCD and how that is set up. Now let me stop here, because otherwise there's nothing left.
Absolutely. So there's one question over there. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sam Roth.
Sir, I can't hear you. Probably you need to stand. Typically, you need to stand up.
Is this better? Is it on now? Okay, great. So I'm Sam Rosemarin with African Bamboo. We're actually in the DFCD program. So this is actually great news. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about risk. A lot of the DFIs talk about de-risking investments. But at the end of the day, there's really a lack of first loss capital. So they'll get you right to that finish line, but then no one will take that risk to say, oh, we'll be the first loss capital equity on greenfield projects specifically. And I just want to see your reaction to that because, yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that we can do in DFCD, but it doesn't actually match you with, for example, a first loss capital provider. The DFCD is feeding into FMO loan program, which is great. Carbon markets is something we've explored for that first loss capital. We're raising there, but really that equity piece and a lot of the equity funds that the development banks fund are, of course, private equity, right? And they do brownfields and they do later stage. But and then when you talk to them, they say, well, our LPs, including development banks, don't do first loss capital. They don't allow us. And I think it trickles all the way up to the IC at the development bank. So if you could reflect on that.
Michael, just a quick note.
Excellent question. And I'm afraid I'm not going to give you any holy grail here. But on the spectrum of blended finance, this is a super important one. Eh? So last year at COP, we launched the SDG Loan Fund, which was a $1 billion fund with a MacArthur Foundation taking some first loss in FMO as well. But that's a debt structure. We are now looking at equity structures because there are many missing middles, but this is one. And we need to get more of that early patient capital in. And I think there are a couple of philanthropies understanding that much more and more. And I hope the next section will kind of dive into that because we will need that.
Fantastic. You have one more question and then I think a couple of minutes left. So
yes, I am here. Hi. I'm Sarah. I own a commercial operation, and what we do essentially is we utilize the fiber that is inside of pod of trees, and these trees produce fiber for about 100 years. We pick the fiber, and I actually have we are a Dutch corporation, by the way. We have automated the process, so we industrialized the process of the fiber. We have R&D, so we're actually introducing the fiber into the textile industry. So what we do is we are essentially increasing the demand for the fiber, and therefore we're increasing the demand to plant trees. So what we have a pilot with the factory. So we have, of course, the commercial operation. And in 2021, I opened a non-profit foundation, and I'm actually gifting the trees, trying to plant them. But I really cannot find anybody to help me finance this project. So I was wondering if you had some insight for me.
Well, we can of course kind of look at that because either in the DFCD or in other of our structures that could be interesting because we made a pledge and it's not as big as a gentleman here, but to finance up to $1 billion until 2030 in this area, and we did brownfield plantations, but we're moving all the way up to kind of natural forest and nature-based solutions. So if you have a business model kind of behind it, it's even better because purely banking on carbon credits, that's also still a bit of a question in the market. But I would be surprised to see if that's not bankable what you're describing me on basis of this 30 seconds. And I see I need to wrap up. So I'm going to thank you very much for your attention and wishing you a fantastic COP.
Thanks very much, Michael. Now I would like to invite Martin Lemoyne from the Asian Development Bank.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? So, I mean, it's really great to hear all these perspectives. Really, it's the different pieces of the puzzle. I feel like we are all looking at the elephant from a different perspective, and at the end, we'll have a complete picture of the animal, hopefully. So, I'm from the private sector department of ADB. So, I will come from that perspective. The overall needs for biodiversity and climate finance in ag and forestry are over $1 trillion a year, according to quite a few estimates. But I think what's interesting in my view is that 80% of those needs relate to productive land as opposed to conservation. So conservation is important, but it's actually, in a way, the minority of the needs. Most of the needs relates to productive land. And so while nature is a public good, we need to somehow work on private goods to promote this public good. So it's kind of the paradox that we have here. And I think, which brings me to the fact that we need to work with the farmers We've mentioned the 3F, but I would add another one. Farmers is another F that is very important for forestry and agroforestry, because they are at the forefront of the fight for climate and for biodiversity. So the 600 million farmers in the world, I think that those are our partners. And I think Todd and Dina earlier mentioned the role of the farmers. So ADB works with governments. Noel mentioned what we do with governments. We work with the finance sector. For example, we made an investment in New Forest, Jeffrey's fund, which was a blended finance investment combining commercial equity and donor money from Australia. But what I do is I work directly with the private sector companies. I'm the head of the agribusiness team at ADB. And so far we've deployed 1.2 billion into agribusiness, and close to 500 million of that relates to agroforestry or forestry. So let me give you a few examples, because almost all of it is actually climate finance. But interestingly, most of it has been booked under adaptation, not mitigation. It's a little bit counterintuitive when you think of forestry, but because of the farmers and the importance of the trees for the farmers, it has been actually more evident for us to book it under adaptation. So just a few examples, we've deployed 500 million in the coffee sector, including $5 million of technical assistance with players like Olam, Louis Dreyfus, or Ecom. And so working directly with thousands of small farmers to maintain their agroforestry systems, which combine coffee with other crops. So the tree provides shade, which is what it's called adaptation, because there is this role of the trees lowering the temperature of other crops. And then, of course, you prune the trees and you make biochar from it. So you can also teach farmers to do this. So we've implemented that in many projects. So that's on the coffee sector. On the wood processing sector, we worked in Indonesia with smallholder farmers on Java Island, and almost like social forestry. So these trees originally were planted to prevent landslide. So again, adaptation. But then they became an additional income from those farmers that could sell it to a wood processing plant for processing. And then this company is directly incentivized to work with those farmers to perpetuate this model. So it's really a win-win model. And again, we provided financing to the company, but also technical assistance to the farmers. For example, what we did is to train them for them to become FSC certified. It's typically very difficult to certify smallholder farmer FSC, but we are trying to do that in Indonesia. On mitigation, so commercial forestry can have a climate mitigation benefits, even though the forest is cursed, because it's being replaced and because the wood the carbon is fixed into the wood, more or less for a long period. But if it's used in construction, for example, maybe for 100 years, you can have the carbon fixed in the wood, which is why there is a mitigation benefit. And of course, recycling of the wood is also very important. So that's something that has to be addressed. You have to look at the full life cycle of the product. So in China, for example, we are working with a company to produce oriented strand board, OSB, if you're familiar with it. And the good thing with OSB is that you can use any kind of wood, bamboo, waste, wood waste, branches, or even fast-growing wood. So the good thing with OSB, you can really use wood resources that are nearby. So you will reduce transportation cost and use the wood resources nearby to do this material that can be used in construction, in furniture. So that's fantastic. In India, we have another model where we are helping smallholder farmers plant fruit trees on barren land. And so we are doing that with a client. They are advancing the funds to raise voluntary carbon credit. And so this carbon credit revenue most of it will go to the farmers, even though they have not paid anything, but because they are the one caring about the trees. And so that's a fantastic model. And what we are exploring, very innovative, is that instead of this additional income just going to the farmers and they do whatever they want with it, we will try to convince the farmer to use some of this income to buy crop insurance and weather insurance. So it's almost mitigation finance helping adaptation to close the loop. So that could be something very innovative. And so back to the carbon credit, it's a very interesting space, as you know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. And that concludes our section on development banks. Thank you very much for your time. We're going to move on to the final segment of our puzzle. We're almost there in completing the circle. So I'd like to invite up our teams from the philanthropic and coalition sector. Mr. Chris, President of the World Cocoa Foundation, and Mr. Sean Frisbee, Chief Partnerships Officer from Emergent. A completed circle. Almost there. Okay. Thank you everybody for staying with us this long. We are almost there. This is our last segment. And right after this, we'll get into a session of facilitating all of the items that we've discussed today. So please do stick with us for the next round as well. So for now, let's invite Mr. Chris Vincent.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Chris Vincent, and I'm the president of the World Cocoa Foundation. And I'm going to talk come at it again from a slightly different angle and talk about a PPP that we lead in the deforestation space within the cocoa industry. So firstly, who's WCF? We are a member-based organisation that represents the entirety of the cocoa sector, from farmers to cooperatives to the major global brands. And we focus exclusively on sustainability, and in three areas in our space are child labour, improving farmer income, and then particularly relevant for today is preventing deforestation and promoting reforestation. And our role is largely as a convener. So we convene industry responses and policy developments in major issues like the EUDR, liaising with producing country governments and consuming country. And we also run what we call collaborative programs. And that's where we have our major collaborative program, which is an initiative called the Cocoa and Forests Initiative. It's been running since 2017. It has 35 companies and the governments of Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire as signatories. And so that's a very large PPP in the sector. Over the last 7 years, we've had some tangible results in that we have developed about 150,000 hectares of agroforestry. We've trained 500,000 farmers on issues related to deforestation, and we've made significant progress in traceability. But I think the major achievement of that objective is actually alignment. So what we managed to do through the process of getting everybody to sign up to the frameworks of action is that we actually managed to align governments, and when I say two governments, as you all know, that is actually probably 4 or 5 ministries and 5 or 6 different agencies, plus 35 companies, to align on frameworks that aligned activities, reporting, programming, and accountability. And because we were able to do that through the frameworks, whilst there are tangible results, we've now got those entities aligned, and therefore investment from the private sector is increasing, and the programs that they're running are increasing in both quality and the innovation in those programs. But where we move to the next step, and this is where new finance really comes in, is that those activities have largely been in companies' own supply chains, and we now need to move out of that. And the only way that we will do that is through landscape approaches. And I just wanted to use the purpose of this short speech to say, so what is the role of development and philanthropic capital in a private sector initiative where companies have already spent about $300 million themselves over the last 3 years? And it comes in really to, I think, 2 categories. One is the catalytic element, evidently. There are certain things that private sector companies are simply not comfortable investing in. And those, I think, fall in 2 zones. One that hasn't been talked about, I think, and that is just simply the development and the generation of the project to a stage where private capital can crowd in. So last year, in a landscape we're trying to develop in Ghana, we had some UK government money through Partnerships for Forest who invested in multi-stakeholder governance platforms to build that landscape out, who built capacity within the ministry in Ghana to be able to take their role in the project. And those things are simply just, I use the word foreign to private companies. They're just not comfortable with investing in those areas. So it's very important that we bring outside capital to do that. And I think what was touched upon just a bit earlier, the first loss element, the high risk element. If development capital can take that risk on, we can bring significant private sector capital in. And I think the second area is expanding the project. Companies naturally like their own supply chains, their own business, investing close to home. By the landscape approach, we're trying to break them out of that into a collective investment in an area. But external development capital can really then build on that platform and expand the area around it by a platform that hopefully the private sector capital has built. And again, there are elements in the program, and I'm thinking most specifically here, I think in the area of protection, where again, government companies are not really comfortable funding potentially government-based protection mechanisms of the forests. And so it's really just a case of there are elements of risk in all of these projects that we can share with other funders, and that will crowd in more private capital. But I think what I'll come back to is, how do we move forward from here? How do we catalyze private sector capital with development capital? I think it's about alignment. The original success of CS5 was alignment. We need to be co-creating. I think you need organisations, and I would say this, but like ours, who can sit in the middle and work with you to say, well, actually, this is how industry thinks. Industry does not like that risk, so we've got to find a way of packaging that risk up. But it's a two-way conversation as well. We need to go back to companies and say, well, you want to do this, but they don't want to do that, so how do we solve that problem? So I think the key message here is, I think we are trying to build the opportunities, but the key element is alignment, communication and co-creation, not either side saying, here's what I do you want to follow? How can we actually work together? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Sean?
That was great. Thanks, Chris, for that. And thanks for this wonderful event. This is really exciting. I think I'm the last one, so the puzzle's about complete now and the discussion can start very quickly. As others have said, solving the puzzle is super urgent. If we follow the Glasgow Declaration target, we've got 6 years left to really crack it. We need all the levers here to be pulled, and we need all the actors playing their part. And whilst Chris and I have got the title of the piece is Philanthropies and Initiatives, I'm going to talk about initiatives and perhaps more specifically, if you don't mind, a minor rebrand about partnerships. So there's this adage, isn't there? Many hands make light work. And I think I also sort of think of it as many hands can make the right work as well, right? So we don't need small solutions with individual actors, with individual approaches anymore with the time that we have and the scale of the challenge. We need everybody pulling together, lots of hands, lots of levels, whether it's the system level, the government level, private sector level, or local communities, and they need to come together to produce the best shared outcomes and the most just transition that we possibly can for everybody affected by this issue, which is billions of people, if not all of us. So we can do this through partnerships. My title at Emergent, which is best known as the coordinator of something called the LEAF Coalition, is Chief Partnerships Officer. What the hell's a Chief Partnerships Officer? You're probably thinking, and why would you need one of those? Please don't say that to my boss. I don't want you to ask him that question. Look, let's look back where Emergent and LEAF began and why we exist. In 2007, there was a framework agreed by all of the parties to the UNFCCC called RED+. The framework's been built up over many years. Developing countries have been building strategies to address deforestation, all of the drivers of deforestation across their entire territories. And the idea was this would build through 3 phases. The first one would be readiness, the second one would be implementation, and the third one would be results-based payments on a big scale, and a lot of people missed this, I think, in the framework, but it was very clear that the money would not just come from public sources, but also from the private sector. Up until Glasgow in 2022, though, all of the money that flowed into the REDD+ framework for results-based payments for countries that were reducing deforestation came from the public sector. So that's why Emergent was created. Emergent is a non-profit that was set up to change that imbalance. In 2021, we launched the LEAF Coalition, which is a partnership with, initially it was with 3 governments, UK, Norway, US, and with some big companies like Amazon, Bayer, Airbnb, McKinsey, GSK, PwC, and it's been growing since then. We've had the addition of South Korea to the coalition. We're at more than 30 corporate buyers now. We've had 26 eligible proposals from countries that are working under the ARC-Trees carbon standard to create jurisdictional REDD+ credits that our companies have signed up to buy. And we've raised well in excess of $1 billion from our partners to purchase those credits. Last year at the COP in Dubai, we announced our first deals with Costa Rica and Ghana. Then earlier this year, we announced a $180 million deal with the state of Pará in Brazil, which is hosting the COP next year, showing that LEAF can really, really be scaled. And we're hoping to announce a couple more deals soon, perhaps one at this COP next week. We think this is going to be, if it's not already, the biggest public-private partnership in the world that is squarely aimed at halting tropical deforestation. And it's a single point of contact already now for more than 26 governments and 30 buyers to come together in the most efficient way possible. But fundamentally, and I think it was Chris that was saying this is really about bringing people together, and that's the job that I do every day. It's about bringing together the private sector perspective and the supply perspective of the countries and helping them understand each other and what's going to work best to generate the most revenue possible for the results that they're generating given the realities of the market. I just wanted to actually be quite brief and give you a couple of lessons on partnerships in case you want to put these at the heart of your forest finance strategy, in case you want to create your own chief partnerships officer in your organization. So a couple of things we've learned. Partnerships are a little bit about overcoming chicken and egg problems, ideally. They can build a critical mass, but in order to do that, you have to really convince all of the partners around the table that it's a serious proposition on all sides. And so for LEAF, that meant addressing that long-standing shortfall of private finance that hadn't been coming into the REDD+ framework. The countries needed to be able to see that the private sector was there and they were serious. So we've been focusing a lot of our attention on that initially. There was some commentary that perhaps LEAF was something of a buyer's club initially. That's actually quite intentional, because when you're trying to create a partnership to break a cycle like that, somebody needs to make the first move, and in this case we had to get a lot of companies signed up to the coalition. So that's the point at which we started. Second thing I wanted to highlight that's very difficult about creating successful partnerships is that they need to find the maximum part of the maximum common ground, the maximum point of the maximum outcomes for all the parties involved, as Chris was saying. If your partnership is really breaking through into new territory and heading for the scale that we need, you'll probably look around the table at all of your partners and find that most of them are generally happy. Maybe they're all generally happy, ideally, but also everybody's had to give a little bit of ground in some way. They've learned something in the process. And possibly some people are a little bit unhappy they didn't get everything they wanted, but that's a good thing, right? Because that's what I was talking about. I think many hands make the right work happen. So that's it. I'm going to hand back for the discussion that's going to follow, I believe, and just implore you all to take into that discussion all of those forest partnerships that you've been working on, and think about how partnerships can be a central part of the solution. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sean. Thanks very much, Chris, and also for the philanthropies and partnerships. We'll call it that. Exactly. So I think there's going to be a photo right now with the speakers who are still here. Is that everybody? Oh, everybody. All right. Photo? Where do you want it?
Yeah. It'd be nice just to have a quick photo of everyone that's time, we'd love for you to stay and engage in discussion, but we understand you have to leave as well. But partnerships will add that to the puzzle piece. All right, let's go. All right, so everyone, please join us. Yeah, just join us, quick. And Juliet's back just in time for the photo. All right. Honestly, all of you are so determined. Almost 3 hours. Yeah, resilient. Yeah. What is it? Event resilient people.
Mitigation.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so everyone. Yeah, so maybe we'll... No, I don't mind being in the back. No. Oh my God. Okay, a quick one. All right, 1, 2, 3, trees. We love trees, we love forests.